It was one of those cold, quiet nights, the kind where every little noise echoes through the house. I was alone, curled up on the couch with a blanket, watching TV. My house is a bit secluded, surrounded by trees, which usually makes me feel safe, but that night, the isolation felt different, like something was out there, just beyond my sight. Around midnight, I heard a knock at the door. It wasn't a frantic knock, just a soft, deliberate tap, tap, tap. I hesitated, staring at the door from across the room. It was late, and I wasn't expecting anyone. My gut told me not to answer, but curiosity got the better of me. I approached slowly, peering through the peephole. There was no one there. I exhaled, a little relieved, and was about to turn away when I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. My skin prickled. I looked through the peephole again, and this time I saw something. A shadow, just at the edge of the porch, barely visible. My breath caught in my throat. It was as if someone was standing just out of sight, waiting. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding. I tried to tell myself it was just a prank, maybe some neighborhood kids. I went back to the couch, turning up the volume on the TV to drown out the unease. But then, the knocking started again, louder this time, more insistent. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police, but before I could dial, the knocking stopped. The sudden silence was almost worse. I waited, holding my breath, straining to hear anything. Then, from the back of the house, I heard the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open. I froze. I knew I had locked all the doors. I was sure of it. My hands were trembling as I crept towards the hallway, the floorboards creaking under my feet. The back door was ajar, swinging slightly in the breeze. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold night air. Suddenly I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the kitchen. I ducked into the nearest room, my bedroom, and locked the door. I pressed my ear against the wood, listening as the footsteps grew closer, pausing right outside the door. I could see the shadow of feet beneath the gap, motionless. Then, the doorknob turned, slowly, rattling against the lock. I backed away, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they could hear it. The rattling stopped, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, a voice, a low whisper, almost a hiss, came from the other side of the door. I don't remember much after that. I think I screamed. I must have, because the next thing I knew, I heard sirens in the distance. The police found me curled up in the corner of the room, the door still locked. There was no sign of anyone, no footprints, no forced entry. Just the back door, wide open, swaying in the wind. Growing up, my parents' house backed onto a dense forest. As a kid, I loved exploring the woods, finding hidden trails, and pretending I was on some grand adventure. But as I got older, the forest began to feel less like a playground and more like a place I should avoid. It wasn't anything I could put into words, just a feeling, an unease that grew stronger every year. One summer evening when I was about 16, I decided to take a walk through the woods. It was almost dusk, the sun casting long shadows between the trees. I don't know why I went out there. Maybe I was feeling nostalgic, trying to recapture the carefree days of my childhood. I hadn't gone far when I saw him, a man standing a few yards away, partially hidden behind a tree. He was tall, wearing a dark coat, his face obscured by the shadows. He didn't move, didn't say anything, just stood there, watching me. My first thought was that it was someone from the neighborhood, maybe out for a walk like me. I gave a small wave, trying to be friendly, but he didn't respond. A chill ran down my spine, and I turned to head back home. I walked quickly, trying not to look back, but I could feel his eyes on me. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just some stranger, but the feeling of dread wouldn't go away. I glanced over my shoulder, and my heart nearly stopped. He was closer, moving silently between the trees, his face still hidden. I broke into a run, the branches whipping against my skin as I stumbled over roots and rocks. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps quickening to match mine. The house was just ahead, the lights from the kitchen window a beacon in the growing darkness. I burst through the back door, slamming it shut behind me, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I looked out the window, but there was no one there. The woods were still, the shadows deepening as the last light of day faded away. I tried to tell my parents, but they brushed it off as my imagination. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, a figment of my mind. But I stopped going into the woods after that. And sometimes at night, I'd look out my window and see a figure standing at the edge of the trees, watching. When I was in college, I rented a small house just off campus. It was an old place, with creaky floors and drafty windows, but it was cheap, and I didn't mind the quirks. The house next door had been empty for years, the windows boarded up, the yard overgrown. The landlord told me it had been abandoned after the last tenant disappeared, but I figured it was just a story to scare off curious students. One night I was up late studying, the only light in the house coming from the lamp on my desk. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're the only person in the world. I was just about to call it a night when I heard something. A soft thud, like something falling over. I paused, listening. The sound had come from the house next door. I got up and went to the window, peering out at the dark silhouette of the abandoned house. For a moment, everything was still. Then, I saw it. A flicker of movement in one of the upstairs windows. It was quick, just a shadow passing by, but it was enough to make my skin crawl. I told myself it was nothing, probably just an animal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The next night, it happened again. I was lying in bed when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from the direction of the abandoned house. I got up, my heart pounding, and looked out the window. The upstairs light was on. I could see the faint glow seeping through the cracks in the boards. I watched, my breath caught in my throat as a shadow moved across the room. I called the landlord the next day, asking if anyone had moved in, but he said no. The house was still empty, had been for years. I tried to put it out of my mind, but every night the sounds continued. Footsteps, tapping, the creak of floorboards. It was like someone was living there, just out of sight. One night I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a flashlight and went outside, determined to prove to myself that it was all in my head. The front door of the house was unlocked, the wood swollen from years of neglect. I stepped inside, the air thick with dust and the smell of mildew. The floorboards creaked under my weight as I made my way through the dark, empty rooms. I reached the stairs, the flashlight beam flickering as I started to climb. The tapping sound was louder now, coming from the room at the end of the hall. I approached slowly, my heart in my throat. I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling, and pushed the door open. The room was empty, the walls bare, the windows boarded up, but the tapping continued, coming from the corner of the room. I turned the flashlight towards the sound, and my blood ran cold. There, carved into the wall, were words, hundreds of them, scratched deep into the wood. "Let me out, let me out, let me out." I ran, stumbling down the stairs and out into the night, not stopping until I was back in my own house, the door locked tight behind me. I moved out the next day. I don't know who or what was in that house, but I wasn't going to stick around to find out.